Hello everyone! Welcome to part 2 of making the yarn tools out of clay. I already made the videos last video. So this one I'm actually going to test to see were they actually worth it. I mean, if they're worth it, maybe I could attempt to make more and try to get better at it. Or if they're not really worth it, then it's just a one-off thing, you know? So we're going to test these, kind of like all of them. So we're going to start with the knitting, 3 rows, stockinette stitch, 5 stitches, the typical formula I use for this. We're going to cast on kind of loosely. I mean, these are still pretty thick needles, like these are thicker than most of the needles that I have, so in the future I probably should have used a thicker yarn, but or I could try to work to see if I could get the needles to be thinner, but then they'd be more fragile. This might be like the first time I've used needles that legitimately have my fingerprint imprinted into the actual needle itself. The stopper's a different story because, as I mentioned in a previous video, my first set of knitting needles ever had polymer clay stoppers on them. Well, not necessarily ever the ones that I legitimately learned how to knit on. And the friction's not bad either. It's not as, like, it's still like relatively smooth and the yarn's like staying still. It's not the easiest thing to slide, but yeah, they worked as knitting needles. I think like it's not my best piece of knitting ever, but that's because I think I was using a yarn that was like too thin for the needles that I had. These would clearly be better for some chunkier yarn. But yeah, like, because I made them like relatively thicker, they're pretty stable. If I had made them thinner, the knitting would look better, but I think they'd be more likely to break. So yeah, this was a pretty good shot. Now I'm going to attempt to knit with the Model Magic needles, which they're still like relatively bendy, which not ideal. Not ideal at all for that, unless it's like a hard plastic. But also I'm reminded of like the texture of when it dries, it feels like foam. The type of sculpture that I was making when I was younger, I didn't like it feeling like foam. Ooh. These needles are inherently more fragile than the other ones. Yeah, I think my hand's like still molding it a little bit. The needles themselves are still curving. I mean, they're still relatively smooth, but they're also rough enough that the yarn is catching on them. Yeah, see, my hand is like bending the needle, and I had an inappropriate example come to mind, which I will refrain from saying because I'm not complete trash, at least not yet. Yeah, typically, like with a straight set of knitting needles, they wouldn't be bending the yarn like this. But my hand is actually like bending both of the needles in that direction. Yeah. Yeah, they're curving on me. That almost, like, it's not as straight of a point that points a bit curved, but for some reason that kind of looks like a finger to me, kind of like how a finger goes like that, just like it kind of curves and then goes up. That kind of has like the same, I don't know why it looks like that to me. Anyway. Yeah, that just like bent on me, man. Again, like this was also relatively thicker. This was also like relatively thicker, like the other clay needles. So again, the same criticism of I probably needed to use a thicker yarn still applies to not get these holes. I mean, I could still knit, but you don't really want... Why can't I think of another word? Oh, I've now thought of another word. Okay. You don't really want your knitting needle to be limp in your arms. You want it to be relatively sturdy. So, like, you want at least part of it to be, like, hard and straight, and you don't want it bending on you like that. I mean, because if it's bending on you like that, it's going to, like, start bending when you don't want it to, because eventually the more you knit, the yarn has a weight, and it's going to affect the weight. So, Sculpey makes great knitting needles. Model Magic, not so much. Especially, I think if I were to get like the coil thinner, I'd probably have to put an armature inside of it. And it'd be easier to put an armature inside of this and expect it to stay. I don't know how well Model Magic would take to an armature. So now we're going to try the crochet hooks. We're going to switch the color yarn just to switch things up. We're going to try the Sculpey crochet hook first. I do not have as high hopes for these crochet hooks as I did for the knitting needles. The knitting needles are relatively straightforward. Crochet hooks are a little bit harder to get right, I feel like, because there's a hook. One, two, three, four, five, and we're going to do 6. It's going to be the same pattern I always do when I'm crocheting. So row of single crochet, row of half double crochet, and a row of double crochet, all 5 stitches. Ooh. It's actually working as a hook. Because I'm sure you've heard me make comments so many times, I'm being the tool more than the tool is being a tool. I don't think that's the case here. I think the tool is actually being the tool. It did just come out at that one spot, but... This is definitely like a thicker crochet hook. If I wanted to get like a thinner crochet hook, I'd probably have to put an armature into it so the coil doesn't break. It'd also be more fragile. And while the hook is like, it is like an odd shape, I tried to get that kind of like indent, and you can see it's not quite the same. But it's close enough. Yeah, that got that through largely itself. I'm very proud of this one. Ooh. Oh. I did just drop it and almost lose a stitch, but it is what it is. Okay. 1, 2, 3. I think I just lost a stitch here. I lost a stitch somewhere. Well, we're just gonna roll with it. Two of the rows are only gonna have 4 stitches. That's just how it's gonna be. Now time for the double crochet row. Well, it's the last stitch on that row. Obviously, the fact that I dropped a stitch and wasn't able to see where it went is not ideal. And it's also not ideal that it looks like I'm doing lace work when that was not the intent at all. I mean, it crocheted. And the hook itself felt pretty nice. This was, like, I didn't feel like I was going to break it. Even feeling more confident about this part now being a nook. And not necessarily breaking on that. Or at least not right away. I mean, I can crochet. That part's fine. But definitely, yeah, I would need to use a thicker yarn with this because there are holes. The train in the background agrees with me. Now I'm going to take this all out, only to do it all over again with the Model Magic hook. Oh my gosh. You see this, right? It's knotting up on me. I can't take it out. Well, we're not going to fiddle with it. Boom. It's trash. I mean, this is waste yarn. I can do this with waste yarn. So, we're just going to put this on. These are Model Magic hook, which I'm concerned about it breaking on me because if you see there's like some sort of like crack starting to form. So I'm hoping it doesn't break on me. Oh, we We don't want it that tight. 2, it's just going to be tight. 3, 4, and 6. Because we want a 5-stitch row. Okay. Ooh. This is the first one that has legitimately broken. It has started to legitimately crack. So now I guess we are playing chicken with the crochet hook. Typically I say yarn chicken, but it's not the yarn that's going to be here. I guess we're playing hook chicken. Oh, you see how it's like cracking on me already? Jeez. This is only the first row too. And it went somewhere. Where'd it go? Well, that was a fail. I have decapitated the hook. Which, I mean, this is, I can't crochet with just that. I could probably try to carve another crocheting thing, but literally it just took like 3 stitches before, like after the chain, before it started, like before it completely came off. So model magic does not make a good crochet hook. If you're going to make a crochet hook, use Sculpey. They made better knitting needles, but the knitting needles, like the needles kind of spread their work over. They just have a point, which is a lot harder to mess up than a hook. Like a hook is a little bit more complicated. You got one part that is going to like bend down, and you got like a smaller part, but also like, even so, I would say the sculpting knitting needles did a better job, because these, even though they did work, they bend. But yeah, well, now it's kind of sticking to itself again, but this is not going to be sturdy enough to be a crochet hook unless you put some sort of armature inside. But if you also look, like here, probably because, possibly my fault because I didn't smooth it enough, but there are like cracks. There are cracks in that part. So yeah, don't use model magic for your crochet hook. It's just meant to be something for little kids to create their own little sculpture with. But once your little kid starts getting to the point where model magic isn't enough for them anymore, because they want to make things more complicated, go ahead and splurge and get them the Sculpey. You can bake the objects for them, or it says has an adult to bake it, but chances are, like, if your kid's responsible enough, they can start baking things in the oven by like age 11. Yeah, that was today's entertainment with clay tools, which overall was a success, which despite this was a success. That was today's entertainment. Have a nice day.